Hello, dear friends. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, and I am 71 years old. I want to tell you about a door. Not every door is frightening when you open it. Most doors in a life like mine, a long life, a quiet life, a life built on routine and devotion and the particular comfort of knowing exactly what is on the other side, most of those doors open onto something familiar. The kitchen in the morning, the garden after rain, the bedroom where I slept for 43 years beside the same man. But some doors, when you step through them, change everything that came before. Not just what lies ahead, but what you thought you already knew, what you were certain of, what you had staked your whole identity on being true. I stepped through one of those doors 14 months ago, and I have not been the same woman since. I am not sorry about that. My husband, Robert Whitfield, died on a Thursday morning in September 2 years ago. He was 74 years old. A heart attack, swift and final, in his office at the commercial real estate firm he had built over 4 decades. His assistant found him at his desk at 9:15 in the morning. By the time the paramedics arrived, there was nothing to be done. I grieved him. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else, 43 years is not a number. It is a life. It is 1,000 ordinary Tuesday mornings, and the particular way someone laughs at a television program and the sound of another person breathing in the dark. When Robert died, a part of me that had no name simply stopped. I felt it go, and I mourned him the way you mourned something that was so woven into you that you are not quite sure where it ended and you began. The weeks after his death were the familiar fog of casseroles and condolence cards and legal paperwork. His attorney, a careful, silver-haired man named Harold Pembroke, who had handled Robert's business affairs for nearly 20 years, became my primary point of contact for the estate. Harold was thorough and kind and asked me nothing unusual. He had been at the funeral. He had accepted a plate of food at the reception afterward and told me Robert had been one of the finest men he had ever known. I thanked him for that. I think about that moment often now. 6 weeks after the funeral, Harold called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a coffee cup, watching a cardinal at the feeder through the window. An ordinary Wednesday. The last ordinary Wednesday I would have for quite some time. Harold always addressed me formally, Mrs. Whitfield. 20 years of professional courtesy. So when he said Eleanor, just that, my first name, unadorned, I set the coffee cup down very carefully in the sink. Eleanor, he said, I've come across something in Robert's estate documents, a property that wasn't included in the joint filing, a residential property. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the table where Robert and I had eaten breakfast together for over 4 decades. My hand found the grain of the wood, the way hands find familiar things in the dark. What kind of property, Harold? The pause that followed lasted exactly 1 beat too long. A beach house, he said, on the Outer Banks, near Kill Devil Hills. Kill Devil Hills. The words dropped into my chest and kept falling. Because 18 years ago, 18 years, I remember it precisely, I found a receipt in the pocket of Robert's gray wool overcoat. A restaurant receipt from a place in Kill Devil Hills, a town on the Outer Banks, where as far as I had ever known, we had no connection whatsoever, no clients, no family, no reason. I had asked him about it, standing in our bedroom doorway, the receipt folded in my fingers. Old client? He said without looking up from the book in his lap. Nothing worth mentioning, and I had let it go. I had been 53 years old. Our children were grown, our mortgage was paid. I had let it go because sometimes a marriage is also a choice you renew every single morning, and I had made that choice so many times that questioning it felt like dismantling something I had spent my entire life constructing. I let it go, and now on an ordinary Wednesday, 18 years later, the thing I had let go was calling me back. Harold offered to come with me. I told him no. This was something I needed to do alone. I drove Route 64 east the following morning, a pale October sky pressing down flat over the Carolina landscape. I watched the terrain shift beneath the tires, tobacco fields giving way to scrub pine giving way to marsh grass and dark water, and then the long silver bridge arcing over Albemarle Sound into the light on the other side. I had time to think on that drive, 2 hours and 40 minutes of thinking, and what I thought about were the cracks. Every long marriage has them. The hairline fractures that are always there if you look directly at them, but that you learn over decades to look slightly away from. I had been looking away from Robert's cracks for a long time, And sitting in that car on that bridge over that water, I finally allowed myself to look straight at them. The credit card statements I was not supposed to open. Business account, Eleanor, I've told you. The trips, 2, sometimes 3 times a month, always for work, always with a client in a city I had no reason to doubt. The Sunday afternoons he spent on the back porch with his voice dropped to nearly a whisper whenever I stepped outside. The cologne I didn't recognize on his collar one Thanksgiving. A sample from the hotel. They leave them in the bathroom. The times I had called his office mid-trip and been told, gently but with a firmness that should have registered, that Mr. Whitfield is unavailable at the moment, may I take a message? And the receipt. Kill Devil Hills. Nothing worth mentioning. I had assembled these pieces over 43 years and stored them in a part of my mind I had deliberately not visited. Not because I was a foolish woman. I have never been a foolish woman. But because I had made a choice about the kind of life I was living, and I had kept choosing it, every morning, for longer than some people are alive. By the time I crossed back off the bridge and turned south, I understood that whatever I was about to find, I had always been moving toward it. I had simply taken the long way. The address Harold had given me led me down a narrow road lined with sea oats and weathered cedar fencing, the ocean audible but not yet visible, until the road curved and there it was, a pale blue clapboard house, 2 stories, fresh paint, flower boxes beneath every front window, planted with purple petunias that had no business looking so cheerful. I sat in my car and looked at those petunias for a long time. Someone had planted them. Someone had chosen that particular purple, those particular flowers, and pressed them into that particular soil. Someone had tended them. Someone loved this place. I got out of the car. I walked up the porch steps, 6 of them, painted white, not a one of them creaking, and I unlocked the front door with the key Harold had mailed me in a small padded envelope marked simply, Whitfield Estate, Kill Devil Hills. I pushed the door open, and that is where everything I thought I knew about my life broke completely open. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Home. It smelled like home. Not my home. Our home in Beaufort, which smelled of lemon oil and the particular mustiness of old books and the lavender sachets I put in every closet. This was another home entirely. A home that had been lived in, deeply and daily, for a very long time. The layered scent of cooking and fabric softener and wood and years of ordinary life accumulated in walls that absorb everything eventually. Someone had been living here. Someone had been happy here. The entry hall had a coat rack beside the door, and there were jackets hanging on it. A woman's rain slicker, a gray fleece, a canvas barn coat I did not recognize. Beside the rack, a collection of shoes. Women's sandals, a pair of running shoes, low heels in navy, and 1 pair of men's loafers, brown leather, well worn at the heel, resoled once. I had given Robert those loafers for his birthday 8 years ago. I remembered standing at the counter of the shoe store on Pollock Street, asking the clerk to box them in the good paper. I remembered the ribbon I tied myself, because I always tied the ribbon myself. I stood in that hallway for what may have been 2 full minutes. I did not move. I was aware of my own breathing, slow, deliberate, the breathing of a woman who has decided not to fall apart before she understands what she is looking at. Then I made myself move. The living room stopped me again. Photographs, everywhere. On the mantel, on the side tables, on a long gallery wall ascending the staircase, in frames clustered on every flat surface. Robert, younger, then older, than the age I last knew him, at a dinner table with wine glasses catching candlelight. Robert on a beach, squinting into sun, laughing at something out of frame. Robert at what looked like a birthday party, holding a cake, wearing a paper crown that was absolutely ridiculous on a man of his bearing and grinning like a boy. And beside him, always in every photograph, a woman I had never seen. Dark auburn hair, perhaps 12 years younger than me. High cheekbones and the kind of smile that suggests the person wearing it knows something you don't. Not a beautiful woman in any conventional sense, but a vivid one. A woman who took up space in a photograph. Sandra. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew immediately, standing in that room, who she was. And there was a child. A little girl who began in these photographs as a toddler, perhaps 2 years old, dark-haired like her mother, round-cheeked, clutching a stuffed rabbit, and who grew across the span of perhaps 20 framed moments into a teenager with braces, and then a young woman in her early 20s in a Navy academic gown, holding a diploma. Christmas trees. Thanksgiving tables. The same table, year after year, with different configurations of dishes and candles and faces, but always those two at the center of it. 4th of July evenings on the very porch I had just crossed. A birthday cake with what appeared to be 30 candles. A beach bonfire. A summer afternoon with a golden retriever I had never seen. 25 years of photographs. The property records went back 25 years. Harold had told me that. Our son Daniel had been 29 years old when Robert bought this house. Our daughter Claire had been 26. Our grandchildren were being born. Our life, the one I had believed was our life, was fully underway. And this whole time, this entire second chapter of what I had thought was my story, Robert had also been here. Also there. Also somewhere else entirely. Also someone else entirely. I did not cry. I want to tell you that I cried, because it seems like the correct response to what I was looking at. And because if I had been watching someone else stand in that room, I would have expected tears. But what I felt in that moment was colder than grief and heavier than anger. It was the sensation of a foundation shifting, not collapsing all at once, but moving, slowly, with a grinding and geological inevitability that told you every structure built above it could not stand much longer. I walked through every room. I did it methodically, the way you do a thing when the alternative to being methodical is coming apart. I opened doors and looked inside and closed them again. A master bedroom with a woman's jewelry box on the bureau and 2 reading lamps on 2 nightstands, both with books on them. A second bedroom that had once been a teenager's room. Band posters faded on the walls. A shelf of young adult novels, a corkboard with old photographs pinned to it, ticket stubs, a dried corsage. A bathroom with 2 toothbrushes still in the holder, which I registered and moved away from quickly. The kitchen was fully stocked. The refrigerator had food in it. Recent food. A half-finished container of orange juice. Leftover pasta in a covered bowl. Someone had been here within the past week. And on the kitchen counter, beside a ceramic fruit bowl with 2 oranges in it, there was an envelope. White, standard. Robert's handwriting on the front. I would have known it in the dark, after 43 years, in his careful, slightly left-leaning hand. For Sandra and my girl. My girl. I stood at that counter for a moment with my hand resting on the envelope, but not opening it. Then I opened it. 2 pages. Handwritten. Dated 9 months before his death. I will not reproduce it in full, but the portion that mattered, the portion that transformed every cold, shifting thing I had been feeling into something hard and clear and purposeful, read as follows. I have arranged things so that you will be taken care of. The house is yours in every way that matters. When the time comes, I want Lily to have it formally. Harold knows what to do. Harold knows what to do. I set the letter back on the counter, carefully, the way you set down something that might explode if handled wrong. Then I pulled out a chair from their kitchen table, the one I was standing at in someone else's kitchen, in someone else's life, and I sat down, and I began to count. 43 years of what I had believed was a faithful marriage. The identity of a woman whose husband had chosen her, only her, completely and without reservation. A past that was now being rewritten, retroactively, in ways I could not yet fully calculate. Trust in my own perception, which I had always considered one of my steadier qualities. And this was the thought that sharpened everything into a single bright point, potentially a very significant portion of what I had assumed was our joint estate. Robert had been a commercial real estate man for his entire career. He understood property. He understood asset structures and holding companies, and the many legal instruments by which a resourceful person could arrange their finances so that certain things were visible and certain things were not. If this house existed outside our joint estate, if he had arranged it that way deliberately, what else might? How many business trips? How many client accounts? How many years of careful architecture had been quietly constructed while I ironed his shirts and trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet? Harold knows what to do. Was that a set of instructions that had already been carried out? While I sat in Beaufort receiving casseroles and signing paperwork, was Harold Pembroke already in motion? Was Lily, whoever Lily was, already in contact with him? Had something already been transferred, already been moved, already been made to disappear before I ever walked through this door? I am a 71-year-old woman, a And I have learned over the course of a long life that people sometimes mistake that for helplessness, for passivity, for the kind of dignified, quiet acceptance that women of a certain age are expected to perform when the world decides to rearrange itself without asking their permission. That has always been their mistake, not mine. I did not take the letter. I did not want to disturb anything before I understood the full shape of what I was dealing with. I memorized its contents, precisely, completely, word by word, and I left everything exactly as I had found it. I walked out, pulled the door closed behind me, went down the 6 white porch steps, and got back in my car. The drive home took 2 hours and 40 minutes, just as the drive out had. But I was a different woman making it. Somewhere on that road, I think it was crossing back over the Sound, the late afternoon light going gold and flat across the water. The outline of what I needed to do assembled itself in my mind with a clarity I have rarely felt about anything. First, I needed my own attorney, not Harold. Harold was Robert's attorney, and that letter, Harold knows what to do, had made his loyalties something I could no longer afford to assume. I needed someone who represented only me. Second, I needed a full accounting of Robert's estate, every property, every account, every asset, every entity, before anything could be moved or transferred or quietly made to vanish. A complete and verified inventory, obtained legally and on the record. Third, I needed to understand exactly who Sandra and Lily were, what they knew, what they had been told, what they had already been given. I had been a good wife for 43 years, patient, faithful, quiet in the ways that long marriages require quietness. I had let things go that I should have examined. I had accepted explanations I should have questioned. I had renewed my choice every morning, long past the point where I had enough information to make that choice wisely. I was finished letting things go. By the time I turned onto my street in Beaufort and pulled into the driveway of the house I had lived in for 38 years, I had made my decision. The kind of decision you make once and do not revisit. The petunias were still blooming in those window boxes on the Outer Banks, purple and cheerful and utterly indifferent to what they had just witnessed. I went inside, put on the kettle, and called my neighbor Dorothy. "Dorothy," I said when she picked up, "I need to tell you something, and then tomorrow morning, first thing, I'm going to need the name of the best estate attorney in Carteret County." There was a brief pause. "Eleanor," Dorothy said, "whatever it is, I'm right here." I sat down at my kitchen table and I began. The name came to me before Dorothy even finished her sentence. Patricia Caldwell. I had known Patricia for 11 years through the choir at First United Methodist, not as a close friend exactly, but as the kind of woman you notice in a room. Small, precise, with reading glasses on a gold chain, and a manner that communicated, without effort or performance, that she had heard everything and was surprised by nothing. She sang alto. She was never late. When there was a dispute about the Christmas program repertoire, and there was always a dispute about the Christmas program repertoire, Patricia was the one who resolved it in 4 sentences and moved on. I had known she was a lawyer, estate and family law. I had not, until that Wednesday evening, understood how grateful I would one day be for that fact. I called her at 8 o'clock the following morning. She said, "Come in this afternoon, Eleanor. 2 o'clock. Something in my voice had communicated the gravity of the situation without my having to explain it. That is the thing about a woman like Patricia Caldwell. She hears what is underneath the words. 25 years of sitting across from people in crisis will do that to a person. I brought everything I had. The address of the beach house, Harold Pembroke's name and the name of his firm, the date of Robert's death, and the contents of the letter. Not the letter itself, which I had left undisturbed on that kitchen counter in Kill Devil Hills, but the letter as I had memorized it, word for word, standing at a stranger's counter in my husband's other life. Patricia listened without interrupting. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, and she made notes in a small, even hand, but she did not look at the pad when she wrote. She looked at me. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses for a long moment. "Eleanor, how much do you know about Robert's business accounts?" "I know what he told me," I said. "Which, as it turns out," she said carefully, "may not be very much." She picked up her pen again. "The first thing we need is a full estate inventory. I'm going to file for one immediately, and I'm going to send Harold Pembroke a formal notification, certified mail today, that you have retained independent counsel and that no asset transfers of any kind are to proceed until that inventory is complete and independently verified. She paused, tapping the pen once against the pad. I also want to send a records request to the county recorder's office. A full search of all property held under Robert's name, his legal name, his middle name, and any known business entities he was associated with. She looked up. Eleanor, I want to ask you something directly. Do you have any reason to believe that Harold Pembroke was actively participating in concealing assets from you during Robert's lifetime? Not just now, after the death, but before. I thought about the letter. About 9 months of that letter sitting on a kitchen counter while Robert drove to Kill Devil Hills and drove back and kissed my cheek and sat across from me at our breakfast table and asked me how I had slept. Harold knows what to do. Yes, I said. I think I do. Patricia nodded once, the small, precise nod of a woman who has already begun to move. Then we have work to do, she said. The legal machinery, once started, moves with a slow and unstoppable gravity of its own. Patricia filed the estate inventory motion within 48 hours. A certified letter went to Harold Pembroke's office. Formal, correct, and I imagined deeply unwelcome. Another went to the Carteret County Recorder's office, requesting a complete search of all real property records associated with Robert Whitfield, his middle name Thomas, and any business entities registered in his name or with him as a named agent. I went home and I waited. Waiting is harder than acting. I have always known that about myself. I am a woman who functions better in motion than in stillness. But Patricia had advised me clearly, do not contact Harold, do not go back to the property, do not reach out to anyone connected to this matter until we know what we are dealing with. So I waited. I tended the garden. I walked with Dorothy in the mornings. I did not sleep particularly well, but I had not expected to. It was during that waiting period that I made the other decision, the one that would matter more than I knew at the time. I told my children. I drove to Daniel's house first. He lives 40 minutes away in Havelock, in the house he and his wife Karen bought the year their first child was born. Daniel is 47 years old, quiet-natured and deliberate, with Robert's dark eyes and, I have always thought, something of Robert's stillness. He was building a raised garden bed in the backyard when I arrived, and he came around the side of the house with sawdust on his jeans, and one look at my face made him set down his tools without a word and lead me inside. I sat at his kitchen table, and I told him everything. From the beginning. Harold's phone call, the drive, the pale blue house, the petunias, the shoes I recognized by the front door, the photographs covering every wall, the kitchen that smelled like someone else's life, the letter on the counter with Robert's handwriting on it, addressed to a woman named Sandra and my girl. I watched Daniel's face move through its stages, the careful, controlled stages of a quiet man absorbing something enormous. First a furrowing of attention, the look of someone trying to understand. Then a stillness that was not the peaceful kind. Then something that crossed his face quickly and left his jaw set differently than before. Anger, not the explosive kind, the deep, slow-burning kind that does not announce itself. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Then Daniel reached across the table and put both of his hands over mine. "Mom," he said, "whatever you decide to do, whatever you need, I'm with you. You don't have to explain yourself to me. Not once, not ever." I had not known I needed to hear those words until I heard them. I held onto his hands for a moment longer than I had intended. Claire was harder. My daughter is 44 years old and lives in Raleigh, and she has always felt things more quickly and more openly than her brother, a quality I have admired and occasionally found exhausting in equal measure. She wept when I told her, not immediately, and not for Robert, but for what she called the false version of our family that she had loved, and that had turned out to be only partially true. She was briefly angry at me, for not having seen it, for not having questioned it, for 43 years of looking slightly away. I understood that anger. It was displaced, and it was grief, and it was the particular fury of someone who has just discovered that a beloved thing was never quite what it appeared. She was angry at herself for being angry at me. I understood that too. But by the end of the evening, we stayed on the phone for nearly 2 hours. She had come around to the other side of it. Her voice was different when she got there, quieter and firmer. "What do we do next, Mom?" she said. 4 words, and they meant everything. Dorothy's reaction, when I told her, was characteristic. "That son of a," she said with a precision and clarity I found genuinely comforting. Then, "What can I do?" Dorothy Simmons has been my neighbor and closest friend for 32 years. She is the kind of woman who, when something needs doing, asks what it is before she decides whether she can do it, and then does it. She is organized where I am emotional and clear-eyed where I am sometimes overwhelmed, and in the weeks that followed, she became practically invaluable in ways I had not anticipated. She helped me build the personal timeline that Patricia had asked for, a chronological accounting of every business trip, every credit card irregularity, every moment that had registered and been filed away. We sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad between us, and Dorothy asked me questions and I answered them, and slowly, over 2 evenings, the shape of 25 years of careful concealment became visible on paper. The trips to the Outer Banks, there had been more of them than I had registered. A pattern of late Fridays and early Mondays in the shoulder seasons, when the beaches were less crowded. Business conferences in coastal cities that I had never thought to verify. The cologne, the receipt. He had been building something for a very long time, I thought, looking at that timeline. And he had been building it on the foundation of my trust. Word traveled quietly through the choir and the women's circle I had belonged to for 20 years. Nothing salacious. I had no interest in making Robert's choices into gossip. But people knew I was going through something serious, and the support that came back was quiet and steady and real. Phone calls, notes, the particular companionship of women who have all, in various ways, had to rebuild their lives from pieces they did not choose. Casseroles, yes, but also the deeper thing that casseroles stand for. The acknowledgement that you are not invisible, that your life is seen. I was not alone. Sandra and Lily, I would come to understand, had been counting on me being alone. The property records search came back on a Thursday evening. Patricia called me at 7 o'clock, and I could hear in the measured steadiness of her voice the deliberate, careful tone of a woman who has learned to deliver significant information without inflection, that what she was about to tell me was not small. "The beach house is the most visible item," she said, "but it is not the only one." I sat down. "There is also a condominium unit in Morehead City, held under an LLC. She told me the name, Tidewater Holdings Group. Robert was the sole registered agent. The LLC had been established 13 years ago, 2 years after he purchased the Kill Devil Hills property. The condo has been generating rental income for approximately 12 years, Patricia said. That income has been deposited into an account that does not appear in any joint financial disclosure. Not one. "How much?" I asked. She told me. I sat with that number for a moment. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that reframes things. "There may be more," Patricia said. "We have only begun. But Eleanor, what we have right now is already sufficient to establish a pattern of deliberate financial concealment throughout your marriage. That is legally significant. It changes the estate calculation considerably." I thought of Robert's easy smile, the particular quality of ease he had always carried with him, the ease of a man who knows where he stands, who has accounted for every variable, who has arranged his world with sufficient care that nothing can surprise him. I had always admired that ease. I had believed it came from integrity. It had come from something else entirely. "Patricia," I said, "I want every single one of those accounts found." "That," she said, "is exactly what we're going to do." The offer came through the attorneys, as these things properly should, on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks later. Sandra and Lily had retained a lawyer of their own, a man named Brett Holloway, from a firm in Kitty Hawk that specialized in estate disputes. He was, Patricia told me, competent and experienced. He knew his business. Holloway's proposal was this. Sandra and Lily would relinquish their claim to the Kill Devil Hills property in exchange for a lump sum payment from the estate, a figure Patricia described as substantial but significantly below the property's actual market value, plus a mutual agreement that neither party would pursue further legal action or make any public statement about the circumstances of Robert's double life. Pay them. Stay quiet. Let everyone go home. I listened to Patricia read me the terms. When she finished, I asked her one question. "If I accept this settlement, does it reflect the full value of what was concealed from me during my marriage?" A pause. "No," Patricia said. "It doesn't come close." "Then we decline." A brief silence on the line. "Eleanor," Patricia said, not discouraging me, but careful in the way she was always careful, "I want you to understand what declining means. It means a court date. It means public record. It means your family will know everything in detail." "My family already knows," I said. "I told them myself." Another pause, and then Patricia said something I did not expect. "Good," she said simply. "I'll notify Holloway." It was in the weeks that followed, the filings made, the court date set, the road ahead clear if not easy, that Sandra knocked on my front door. I was in the garden. I go there when I need to think, and there was a great deal to think about in those weeks. I heard a car door and looked up to see two women coming up my front path, one moving with the careful, composed posture of someone who has rehearsed this approach, and behind her, younger, darker, her jaw set with the specific tension of someone managing something volatile. I pulled off my garden gloves. I knew who they were before they reached me, not from any photograph. There had been no photographs of them in my possession, but from the way the older woman was carrying herself, and from the particular quality of stillness in her face that I recognized as costing her effort. Sandra Kellerman was 59 years old, and she was, I will say it plainly, a handsome woman. The auburn hair had gone partly silver. Her coat was neat and well chosen. She had arrived at my home, without warning, without an attorney, without the faintest pretense of accident, and she had come prepared. Behind her, Lily Kellerman, 24 years old, dark-haired like her mother, the sharp cheekbones of the child in those photographs grown into the face of a young woman who was, right now, working very hard to appear less frightened than she was. "Mrs. Whitfield," Sandra said. Her voice was soft, measured, practiced. "I was hoping we might speak, just for a few minutes." "I have legal counsel," I said. "And I assume you do as well. I don't believe this is appropriate." "I'm not here as an adversary," she said. "I'm here as a woman who also lost someone." Something in me, the part that has watched enough human grief to recognize it without being moved by it in ways that compromise judgment, registered that this was real. She had loved Robert. Whatever else was true, that was true, and I did not doubt it for a moment. But I was also aware, with absolute clarity, that this visit had been calculated. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "I mean that sincerely, but I can't discuss the estate outside of our attorneys." Her expression shifted, the composure adjusting, recalibrating. Then she said something that told me everything I needed to know about why she had come. "You should understand that Robert wanted us to have that house. He wanted Lily to have it. We have documents, communications. This is not going to end the way you think it will." "Then your attorney will present those documents," I said, "and we'll let the law decide." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway with my back against it and listened to the muffled sound of a brief exchange on the porch, Sandra's voice, then Lily's, lower and sharper, and then footsteps retreating down the path. I walked to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I sat down. My hands were steady. I noted this with some interest. 3 days later, Lily called me. The number was unfamiliar. I answered because I always answer unfamiliar numbers. At 71, you have learned that unfamiliar numbers sometimes carry important information. Lily was 24 years old, and she was furious in the particular way of someone who has just been informed that the thing they considered theirs, that they had built their sense of self and safety around, does not, in fact, belong to them. It is a very specific fury. I recognized it, even if I had come to it from a different direction. "You don't know what you're doing," she said. Her voice was raw and unsteady. "You don't know what documents we have. You don't know what he said about you. If you push this, everything comes out. Everything. Your children. Your grandchildren. Do you want them reading the details in a court filing? Do you want this to be a public case?" I let her finish. She needed to finish. Then I said very quietly, "Lily, if you have documents, give them to your attorney. And please don't call this number again." I hung up. I called Patricia and reported both contacts. She filed a formal notice within the hour. Any further direct communication with Eleanor Whitfield would be treated as harassment and addressed accordingly. The calls and visits stopped. But I would be dishonest if I told you none of it touched me. It did. That night I lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the full weight of what I had walked into. Not the legal weight. I had made my peace with that. The human weight. The question of what my grandchildren would encounter if this went to court and became public record. The question of whether fighting this would cost me more than it returned. The question of whether a 71-year-old woman, 4 months out from burying her husband, had the stamina and the will for all of it. I gave myself 3 days, not to stop. I was not going to stop, but to breathe. I drove to my sister Ruth's house in New Bern. Ruth Whitfield Garner is 74 years old and has known me for all of those years. The only person alive who knew me before I became anyone's wife or mother, who has the particular vantage point of someone who has watched your whole life from the beginning. We cooked together. We played gin rummy. We watched old films in her den with a bowl of popcorn between us. We did not, for most of those 3 days, talk about Robert or lawyers or beach houses. We talked about everything else, which was what I needed. On the second evening, Ruth dealt the cards and looked at me across the table and said without preamble, "You look like a woman who has decided something." "I have," I said. "Good," she said, and dealt the next hand. I drove home on the third morning. The sky was pale and very clean, the way October skies get in coastal Carolina, and I rolled the window down and felt the salt in the air and thought, I am not going to disappear. I have never in my life disappeared. I am not going to begin now. The court date was set for the second Tuesday in April, Carteret County Courthouse, Beaufort, North Carolina, my town, my courthouse. A building I had walked past hundreds of times over 38 years, without ever imagining I would stand inside it to reclaim something that should never have been taken from me. Patricia had spent 3 weeks preparing. The evidence we had assembled by that point was substantial. Property records for both the Kill Devil Hills house and the Moorhead City condominium. The Tidewater Holdings Group, LLC documents with Robert listed as sole registered agent. 12 years of rental income records deposited into an account that had never appeared on any joint financial disclosure. The letter from Robert, "For Sandra and my girl, Harold knows what to do," photographed during a formal walkthrough of the beach house and entered into evidence. And one more thing, the thing that mattered most, Harold Pembroke's sworn statement. Harold had cooperated fully after Patricia filed the bar complaint, a filing she had been very deliberate about and very precise in her reasoning for. When an attorney knows the bar is watching, she had told me, they tend to remember where their actual obligations lie. Harold's statement confirmed it plainly. He had been instructed by Robert Whitfield over a period of years to facilitate the transfer of the Kill Devil Hills property outside the marital estate upon Robert's death. He had participated in estate planning that actively disadvantaged Robert's legal spouse in favor of a third party, without disclosure and without declining the representation. He had known for years. He had sat at the reception after Robert's funeral, in my living room, eating a ham biscuit and accepting my thanks for everything he had done for our family. I had thought about that moment many times, and I had decided, each time, that what I felt about it was not rage. Rage passes, and it is not useful over long distances, but a permanent, sober revision of how much trust any single person deserves, simply because they have been present in your life for a very long time. Presence is not loyalty. I know that now. Daniel sat behind me in the gallery. Claire had wanted to come. I had asked her to stay home with the grandchildren, not because I doubted her, but because I wanted at least one part of my family to be shielded from the proceedings if I could manage it. Dorothy sat beside Daniel. I did not look at them during the hearing, but I knew they were there, and that knowledge was steadying in a way I had not fully anticipated, the way a hand on your back steadies you even when you are not leaning on it. The night before the hearing, I had not slept well, not from fear exactly, more from the particular restlessness of a person who has been moving towards something for a long time and is finally within reach of it. At 4 a.m, I got up and made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and thought about what I wanted from the day ahead. Not victory. That is too simple a word for what I was after. What I wanted was for the record to be accurate. I wanted the truth of my marriage. All of it. The real version. Not the version Robert had curated for me to believe. To exist somewhere in black and white. Witnessed. Certified. Permanent. I wanted it said aloud, in a room built for saying things aloud, that my 43 years had counted. That they could not simply be reclassified, rearranged, written out of existence because a man I loved had decided once upon a time to keep 2 lives and tell 2 women 2 different versions of the same story. That was what I wanted. I finished my tea. I went upstairs and put on the blue dress I had chosen a week before. I drove to the courthouse in the pale morning light with the windows down and the salt air coming off the sound. I was ready. The Carteret County Courthouse is a building I have always found quietly beautiful. Red brick, white trim, a clock tower that keeps honest time. It sits on the corner of Ann Street and Courthouse Square in the middle of downtown Beaufort, and I have walked past it in every season for 38 years. On the way to the post office, on the way to the market, on the way home from choir practice on cold winter evenings with my coat pulled close. I had always thought of it as simply part of the landscape of my life, part of the fixed, permanent backdrop of a town I had lived in long enough to stop seeing clearly. I saw it clearly on that Tuesday morning in April. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. The air was still cool, the way April mornings are in coastal Carolina before the sun finds its full height, and the azaleas along the courthouse walk were in full bloom, pink and white in an almost violent coral, absurdly cheerful for the occasion. I noticed them the way you notice irrelevant, beautiful things when your mind is very focused. You see them, you register them, and you keep moving. Patricia was waiting for me on the front steps, small, precise, her reading glasses on their gold chain, a leather briefcase that I had come to associate with the particular comfort of competent preparation. She looked at me once, a thorough and professional look, and nodded. "Ready?" she said. "Yes," I said. We went in. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. They always are, I think, when you have spent your life watching courtroom dramas on television, those vast wood-paneled chambers with galleries that stretch back into shadow. This room was practical and well lit, with rows of seating perhaps a third full, and the particular quality of quiet that official rooms hold when something of consequence is about to happen in them. The Honorable Margaret Stokes was already on the bench when we entered, 62 years old, silver hair cut short and practical, with the manner of someone who has presided over enough family estate disputes to have a comprehensive and largely unflattering view of human nature when money is involved. She was reviewing documents as we settled, and she did not look up. I took my seat beside Patricia at the plaintiff's table. Brett Holloway and his clients came in 2 minutes later. Sandra entered first, dressed soberly in charcoal gray, her silver auburn hair pinned back. She did not look at me. She sat down and looked at the table in front of her with the fixed, controlled attention of someone who has prepared very thoroughly for the possibility that looking anywhere else might cost her something she cannot afford to lose. Lily came in behind her mother. She was wearing a dark blazer that looked slightly too large in the shoulders, as though it had been purchased for this occasion, and the occasion was larger than she had accounted for. She looked at me once as she sat down, a direct, measuring look that was intended to communicate something hard and unafraid, and then she looked away. Holloway arranged his papers. A competent man. I had no particular feeling about him. Daniel and Dorothy were in the gallery behind me. I had told myself I would not look back at them, and I didn't. But I was aware of them the way you are aware of something warm at your back on a cold day. Judge Stokes set down her papers and looked at the room. "We're here in the matter of the estate of Robert Thomas Whitfield," she said. "Shall we begin?" It was not a question. Holloway opened for his clients with what he had. He was, as Patricia had told me, competent. He worked with his material skillfully and without apparent embarrassment at its limitations, which is a professional quality I can respect, even when it is deployed against my interests. He spoke about Robert's intentions, the 25-year relationship between Robert Whitfield and Sandra Kellerman, the consistency and sincerity of Robert's commitment to Sandra and to Lily, whom he had helped raise and support through her entire childhood and education. He presented a selection of text messages, warm, affectionate, explicit, in their expression of Robert's wish that the Kill Devil Hills property be considered Sandra's home and Lily's inheritance. He argued that Sandra's long-term occupancy of the property constituted something approaching a domestic arrangement of legal and moral weight, even if it had not been formally codified. He was, throughout, respectful and measured. He did not vilify me. He did not characterize my marriage as anything other than a parallel reality that had coexisted, unhappily, with his client's reality. Judge Stokes listened with an expression of professional neutrality that conveyed nothing and registered everything. When Holloway finished, she looked at him over her reading glasses with the particular patience of a woman who has heard a great many arguments and retains the ability to evaluate each one on its merits. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "help me understand how verbal assurances and a long-term informal arrangement affect legal title to a property held in the name of a legally married man with a living spouse, when that property was acquired using income generated during the course of that marriage. Holloway explained at some length. He was thorough, he cited case law. He made the best argument available to him. It was not enough, and we both knew it. Text messages and verbal promises do not constitute title. Affection, however genuine, however sustained over decades, does not override the legal structure of a marriage. A man cannot simply decide by the force of his own wishes and private arrangements that marital property belongs to someone other than his spouse. The law is, in this respect, unimpressed by sentiment. Holloway sat down. Judge Stokes turned to Patricia. Patricia was, in the plainest terms I can find, extraordinary. She did not perform, she did not grandstand. She simply stood up, opened her briefcase, and began to lay the truth in front of the court, piece by piece, with the methodical patience of a woman who has prepared so thoroughly that she has nothing left to be nervous about. The property records first. The Kill Devil Hills Beach House, acquired by Robert Thomas Whitfield 25 years ago, paid for in cash drawn from a business account, no disclosure to his spouse. The Moorhead City Condominium, acquired 13 years ago under the LLC designation Tidewater Holdings Group, Robert Whitfield's sole registered agent, no disclosure to his spouse. Then the LLC documents themselves. Patricia walked through them line by line. The registration filings, the operating structure, the bank account linked to the LLC, 12 years of rental income flowing into it. She was particularly careful with this section, and particularly effective, because what the documents showed was not a man who had made impulsive or informal arrangements in a moment of sentiment. This, Patricia said, setting a final page on the evidence table, is not a man who made informal promises to a longtime companion. This is a man who retained legal and accounting counsel to structure a business entity specifically designed to generate income that would not appear on any joint marital financial disclosure. For 12 years. This is deliberate. This is systematic. And it is precisely the kind of sustained, intentional concealment that North Carolina estate law is designed to address. She paused. The room was very quiet. The beach house was not a gift, Patricia said. It was marital property, fraudulently shielded. She sat down. Harold Pembroke's sworn statement was read into the record by the court clerk in the flat, professional monotone of someone reading a grocery list, which gave the words an almost surreal quality against the weight of what they contained. Harold had been instructed by Robert Whitfield to facilitate the transfer of the Kill Devil Hills property outside the marital estate upon Robert's death. Harold had participated in this planning. Harold had not disclosed the conflict of interest. Harold had not declined the representation. Harold had known. In the gallery behind me, Daniel made a small, involuntary sound. Not loud, barely audible, but I felt it in my chest more clearly than any sound I heard in that room all morning. It was the rental income figure, read aloud for the second time during Patricia's closing remarks. That was the breaking point. I had been watching Lily from my peripheral vision throughout the morning, the way you watch something without appearing to watch it, and I had seen her composure narrowing and tightening with every document Patricia placed before the court. Each filing was another piece of the story Lily had been told about herself, about her security, her future, her place in the architecture of Robert's life, being quietly reclassified, recategorized, rendered, in the language of the law, without standing. There is a particular grief in watching the official record contradict the life you believed you had been living. I knew something about that grief by then. It had made me methodical. In Lily, it made her stand up. He promised her. Her voice was raw and unsteady and entirely unplanned, and the rawness of it cut through the formal quiet of the room in a way that made everyone go still. He promised her that house. He said it was always going to be ours. She lived there. She raised me. Her voice broke and then reformed, harder. That woman has a house. She has everything he left her. She has 43 years of everything, and she still needs to take the one thing. Lily, Sandra's voice very low, almost beneath hearing. Desperate. Holloway put his hand on Lily's arm. Judge Stokes looked at Lily with an expression that communicated, without cruelty, that she had seen this before, and that her professional response to it was fixed and would not vary. Miss Kellerman, Judge Stokes said, please be seated. Your counsel will have the opportunity to respond through the proper procedure. Lily sat down. She was shaking. I could see it from across the room. The fine, involuntary tremor of someone who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time, and has just, in public, lost their grip on it. Sandra had gone completely still. The color had left her face in a way that made her look older than she had when she walked in, and she was looking at the table in front of her with the fixed inward attention of someone watching something they built very carefully come apart. Not all at once, piece by piece, each piece falling in plain sight. I understood something looking at Sandra in that moment. She was not a villain. She was a woman who had loved a man and built her life around his promises, the same as I had. The difference between us was not that I had been more perceptive or more worthy or more deserving of the truth. The difference was simply a legal document, a marriage certificate filed in a courthouse not unlike this one 43 years ago, and the protections that document conferred. I did not feel triumphant looking at her. I felt the particular complicated sadness of understanding that Robert had done this to both of us. He had given us each a version of himself and withheld the rest, and both versions had been real enough to build a life on, and both lives were now sitting in this room being sorted out by a stranger in a robe because he had not had the honesty or the courage to do it himself. I sat still. I had said what I needed to say through Patricia, through the documents, through the facts. There was nothing left that required my performance. Judge Stokes called a brief recess. In the hallway, Patricia stood beside me and said nothing. She didn't need to. The record had spoken for itself, and we both knew it. Judge Stokes issued her written ruling 9 days later. Patricia called me on a Thursday morning and read it to me over the phone, and I sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, the one Robert and I had eaten breakfast at for 40 years, and I listened. The Kill Devil Hills Beach House was declared marital property and folded into the estate. The Tidewater Holdings Group, LLC, was pierced on grounds of fraudulent concealment. The Moorhead City condominium and its accumulated rental income, 12 years of it, every deposit, every quarter, were likewise folded into the marital estate. The total value added to my legitimate share of Robert's estate, $431,000. On the matter of Sandra and Lily's claims, Judge Stokes was unequivocal. Patricia read the relevant passage. Verbal assurances and informal understandings do not create legal title in real property, particularly when the promising party is legally married and when the property in question was acquired using income generated during the marriage. The estate owes no obligation to Sandra Kellerman or Lily Kellerman. I sat with that number for a long time after Patricia stopped reading. Not with greed. I want to be clear about that, because greed was never what this was about, but with the particular hollow feeling of understanding what had been possible all along, what had been there all along, how completely and deliberately it had been kept from me. Robert had not been a poor provider. He had simply been a dishonest one, and dishonesty at that scale, sustained across 2 decades, structured into legal entities, managed with accountants and attorneys, and the practiced ease of a man who has lived with his own secrets so long they no longer feel like secrets, requires sustained, daily, deliberate effort. He had worked harder at hiding from me than most men work at anything in their lives. "Patricia," I said when I trusted my voice, "thank you." "You did the work," she said simply. "I just knew where to file it." Holloway filed a notice of intent to appeal within the week. Patricia reviewed his stated grounds and told me calmly that the appeal was unlikely to succeed. It didn't. 4 months later, the appeals court affirmed Judge Stokes's ruling in its entirety. Sandra and Lily's legal options were, at that point, exhausted. Holloway withdrew from the representation. The Kill Devil Hills property had to be vacated once the judgment became final. It was during those 4 months, while the appeal was pending, that the matter of Harold Pembroke was resolved. The bar complaint, which Patricia had set aside during the civil proceedings, was reopened. Harold had provided his full cooperation throughout, which the bar noted as a mitigating factor. The finding, nonetheless, was what it was. Harold had participated in estate planning that actively disadvantaged a legal spouse in favor of a third party, representing a clear conflict of interest he had failed to disclose or decline. He had done so knowingly, over a period of years. He was suspended from practice for 18 months and required to complete a professional ethics course before reinstatement. He did not contest the ruling. I heard later, through Patricia, that Harold had written me a letter of apology, a personal letter, handwritten, which he had sent to Patricia's office. Patricia asked me whether I wished to receive it. I thought about it genuinely. I sat with the question for 2 days, the way I have learned to sit with questions that deserve more than an immediate answer. I thought about what reading that letter might give me, whether it would provide something I needed, close something that needed closing, offer a kind of human resolution that the legal proceedings could not. And I thought about Harold at the reception after Robert's funeral, standing in my living room with a plate of food, telling me that Robert had been one of the finest men he had ever known, accepting my gratitude, saying nothing. No, I told Patricia, not out of anger, but because some apologies serve the person offering them more than the person receiving them, and I have no interest in doing Harold Pembroke that particular favor. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's a very precise distinction." "I've had time to think about it," I said. "I sold the beach house. I want to be honest about why, because I think the reason matters, not because I could not have kept it, not because it lacked value. It had significant value, and a financial advisor would have told me to hold it. Not because I bore any particular hatred for those walls or that porch or the pale blue paint that was still fresh when I first walked up those steps. I sold it because I did not want to own a place where someone else's life had been built on the ruins of my peace of mind. Every room in that house held a photograph I had not been in. Every surface had been chosen by hands I did not know, for reasons that had nothing to do with me. The kitchen where I had sat at their table and read Robert's letter. The bedroom with the 2 reading lamps and the 2 books on the 2 nightstands. The second bedroom with the faded band posters and the shelf of novels and the corkboard full of a childhood I had not witnessed. I could have repainted it, refurnished it, stripped it back to bare walls and filled it with my own things and called it mine. It would still have been, to me, the place where I learned what my husband had been capable of. That is not a foundation I wanted to build anything on. A young couple from Raleigh bought it in the summer of last year. A schoolteacher and a landscape architect, newly married, looking for a place that could become theirs over time. They painted over the pale blue. They took out the flower boxes and planted something wilder along the front of the porch. Sea lavender, I was told. It spreads easily in sandy soil. I hope they are happy there. I mean that without reservation and without irony and without any of the complicated weight that surrounds everything else connected to that house. I genuinely hope they are happy. The Moorhead City condominium I kept. It is managed by a local property company and generates rental income that is now, properly and transparently and completely, mine. I review the quarterly statements myself. I understand every line of them. I find unexpectedly that I enjoy this, the small, concrete satisfaction of knowing exactly what I have and where it comes from and what it is worth. Robert, I think, would not have anticipated that particular development. The financial settlement from the estate's full accounting gave me a degree of security I had not expected to have at 71 years old. Security to repair the house in Beaufort, the gutters that had needed replacing for 2 years, the back porch that had been slowly losing its argument with the weather, the kitchen I had been quietly wishing were different for longer than I can remember. Security to help Daniel and Claire in ways that felt like choosing rather than calculating. Security to travel, which I had not done in many years and which I discovered I had been wanting without quite knowing it. That fall, I repainted the Beaufort house. A soft, warm yellow that I had wanted for years and kept putting off, always for reasons that felt practical at the time, and now seem less important than they did. My granddaughter Emma, Daniel's youngest, 9 years old, with her father's dark eyes and already her own very strong opinions about things, helped me choose the color. We spent a Saturday afternoon at my kitchen table with paint swatches fanned out across the whole surface, arguing pleasantly about the difference between warm cream and antique linen and morning butter, and whether any of these distinctions were real or invented by the paint company. Emma held each swatch at arm's length and frowned at it with the gravity of a professional. "This one," she said finally, pointing to a color called Harvest Light. "This is the one, Grandma." She was right. Watching her small, serious face in the afternoon light of my kitchen, surrounded by all those squares of color, is one of the clearest memories I carry from that time. Not from the courthouse, not from the drive to Kill Devil Hills, not from any of the moments that will mark that year in whatever accounting I eventually make of my life. This one, Emma at my table, choosing yellow. That winter I joined a travel group and went to New Mexico with 9 other women, most of us past 65. We drove through the high desert in a rented van, arguing about the radio and stopping whenever something was beautiful, which in New Mexico is frequently. We visited Taos Pueblo and the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum and ate green chile on everything for a week. I came home feeling sharper and more awake than I had in years, the specific alertness of a person who has been reminded that the world is very large and that they have not yet seen most of it. Dorothy and I walk together 3 mornings a week, rain or shine, along the waterfront path by the Sound. We have been doing this for 2 years now, in all weather except the kind that genuinely argues against it, and I consider it one of the reliable goods of my current life. She has stopped asking how I am doing with the particular careful intonation that implies she is bracing for the answer. I take this as a good sign. When Dorothy stops being careful with a question, it means she has concluded you are all right. "You seem different," she told me on a morning last October, about a year after everything had been resolved. We were walking along the waterfront, the Sound gray and quiet on our left, the town just beginning to wake on our right. I thought about her observation for a few steps before I answered. "I think I am different," I said. "Better different or just different?" I considered this seriously, the way Dorothy's questions deserve to be considered. "Both," I said. "Depending on the day." She nodded, satisfied. We walked on. Claire and I repaired something between us that I had not fully known needed repairing. There had always been, in the years before Robert died, a certain formality between us, a maintained and cordial distance that neither of us had ever directly named. Going through the legal proceedings together, the phone calls, the updates, the 2 evenings when Claire drove to Beaufort and sat with me in my kitchen, and we talked without the careful management of feelings that had always characterized our relationship before, dismantled that formality in a way I had not expected and would not have engineered. She calls now, just to talk. Not with news, not with a reason, just a call. I value that enormously. And Daniel told me on a Sunday afternoon last summer, standing in my garden with his hands in his pockets, and the easy, unhurried quality of a man who has decided to say something and is not going to dress it up or find a more convenient moment, that he was proud of me. I want you to know that, Mom. I'm proud of you. For all of it. I did not cry while he was there. I smiled and I thanked him, and we talked for another hour about his children and his work and the raised garden bed he had finally finished building. When he hugged me at the door and drove away, I stood on the porch and watched his taillights disappear around the bend in the road. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and cried for about 10 minutes. The clean, uncomplicated kind. I want to tell you, in closing, where Sandra and Lily ended up. Not out of triumph. Cruelty was never what I was after, and I want you to understand that I carry no version of satisfaction at their difficulties. But you have followed this story to its end, and you deserve the full accounting, told plainly and without embellishment. The failed appeal had cost Sandra and Lily substantially in legal fees. When Holloway withdrew, they were left with a judgment against them, a vacated property, and the public record of proceedings that had been, by any measure, unflattering to their situation. Sandra found an apartment in Manteo. She manages, as far as I know, though not easily. The life that had been built around Robert's provision, the house, the security, the sense of a future that had been arranged and waiting, was gone. She is 59 years old and rebuilding, which is not a position I would wish on anyone. Lily's situation proved more complicated. The details of Robert's double life had become part of the public record sufficiently that they reached the community she had grown up in. The association with a contested estate case created difficulties at the real estate firm where she worked, the kind of difficulties that are never stated directly but are nonetheless real and persistent. She left the Outer Banks within a year of the final judgment. I do not know where she is now. I think about Lily sometimes, more than I think about Sandra. She is 24 years old. She grew up in a house paid for by a man living 2 lives, raised on a version of reality that was genuine from her vantage point and false from mine, and she had done nothing to deserve either the comfort or the loss of it. She was born into circumstances she did not choose, loved a person she was given to love, and lost the security she had been raised to expect, not because of anything she did, but because Robert Whitfield made choices over 25 years that he never reconciled and never made honest. I hope she lands somewhere solid. I mean that. I can hold anger at Robert and sympathy for Lily at the same time, without contradiction, because both things are true and both things are mine to feel. Robert loved Sandra, in whatever way he was capable of loving. He loved Lily. He loved me. He loved Daniel and Claire and his grandchildren. All of this was true, and he concealed from all of us, in different ways and to different degrees, the full picture of who he was and what he had arranged. That was also true. I loved a partial man and believed I was loving a whole one. That was his doing, not mine. The unknowing, the decades of trusting a version of a story that was not the complete story, of building a life on a foundation I had not been permitted to fully inspect. That is something I carry now. I have decided to carry it openly, without shame, because shame implies that I did something wrong, and I did not. I was faithful, and I was trusting, and I was perhaps too willing to look slightly away from the hairline cracks. But loving someone is not a failure. Trusting them is not a failure. The failure belonged to Robert. I have given him his share of it and kept none of it for myself. Patricia and I had coffee in her office on the afternoon the final judgment was executed and the last document was signed. She is not by temperament a celebratory person, and neither am I, but she poured the coffee herself and sat across from me, and there was something different in the room. A quality of settled completion, like the last piece of something clicking into place. "You were right to fight it," she said. "I know," I said. "A lot of women wouldn't have," she said. I thought about that for a moment, about all the ways a woman in my position could have chosen differently. The settlement, the silence, the easier road that doesn't require you to walk into a courthouse and insist, in front of a judge and a court reporter and a room full of people, that your life counted and your years meant something and the law agrees with you. "A lot of women haven't been given enough reason," I said. Patricia looked at me over her glasses for a moment. Then she smiled, small, precise, and completely genuine. We finished our coffee. I thanked her. I drove home. I drove along the coast road, as I often do, the route that takes longer but passes the marshes and the sound and the wide, flat light that I have loved since I was a young woman, newly arrived in this part of the world. The cordgrass was bronze and copper in the afternoon sun, and the water was the particular shade of silver gray that it turns in late autumn, and the sky was enormous and very clean. I thought about Robert, not with the volcanic, shattering feeling of those first months, the grief and the fury and the vertiginous sensation of a life rearranging itself beneath me without warning. That feeling had been real, and it had been necessary, and it had done its work and moved on. What I felt, driving along that road, was something quieter and more complicated and more honest. Grief for what had been real between us. 43 years are not nothing, and a man is not only his worst choices, and I will not pretend that the person I mourned was entirely fictional. Some of what I had was real. I choose to keep that on my own terms, with full knowledge of what I know now. Anger, which has settled over time into something more durable and less consuming. A steady, clear-eyed acknowledgement that what he did was wrong. Not just legally, not just financially, but in the most basic human sense. He owed me the truth, and he withheld it, deliberately, for 25 years. That is a wrong that does not diminish with time or understanding or the complexity of grief. And something else. Something I did not have a name for at first, but have found one for since. Freedom. Not the freedom of having escaped something. I was not a prisoner, and the ending of a marriage, even a marriage that contained this much concealment, does not feel like escape, but the freedom of a woman who knows exactly what she has and where it came from and what it is worth. Who checks her own statements and understands every line, who chose the color for her own house and went to the desert and walks along the water 3 mornings a week in all weather except genuine storms, who fought when fighting was necessary and did not apologize for it, who insisted with all the quiet stubbornness at her command that her 43 years counted. They did. They do. The pale blue house on the Outer Banks is a different color now. The new owners painted it last summer, a warm cream with white trim and dark shutters. They tore out the petunias and put in sea lavender and beach grass and things that grow naturally in that soil and don't need to be tended quite so carefully. Things that can manage on their own. I drove past it once, in the fall, on my way back from a birding trip with Dorothy along the Sound. I slowed down just enough to see the new paint, the new flowers, the lights on inside in the late afternoon. A young couple starting out. The house doesn't know any of this, I thought. It is just a house. Wood and glass and salt air and whatever the people inside it decide to make of it. I drove on. So that is my story. A 71-year-old woman who opened a door and found a life her husband had hidden for 25 years. Who could have taken the settlement, signed the papers, accepted the silence, and taken the easier road? And who chose the courthouse instead? I chose it not because I am exceptionally brave. I do not think of myself as exceptionally brave. I chose it because the alternative was to agree by my silence that what had been done to me was acceptable, that my 43 years could be quietly reclassified, that a woman of a certain age and a certain amount of grief could be relied upon to simply disappear. I was not going to disappear. What did I learn? That a marriage is also a legal document, and that document has value, not just sentimental value, not just the value of years and shared breakfasts and ironed shirts and the sound of another person breathing in the dark, but legal, concrete, enforceable value. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Do not let anyone, not grief, not exhaustion, not the very convincing argument that peace is worth more than justice, talk you out of understanding what you are owed. That the women beside me mattered as much as any evidence. Patricia across her desk, precise and relentless. Dorothy at my kitchen table with a legal pad and the right questions. Ruth dealing cards on a quiet evening in New Bern. Claire saying, "What do we do next, Mom?" Daniel with his hands over mine. I did not win this alone. I was never alone. That you are never, not at 65, not at 71, not at 80 if it comes to that, too old to insist that your life counted. That the years you gave to something were real and have value and cannot simply be taken from you by someone else's choices. You are allowed to stand up. You are allowed to say, "This is mine, and I know what it is worth, and I am not going away." The petunias are gone now. Something wilder grew in their place. I find that fitting.